Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Good Deeds Note Investing podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Jamie Bateman, flying solo as a host today. I'm joined by Eric Smith, special guest. Eric, you're out in California. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm enjoying 75-degree weather.
Nice. I
I
can't say
forgot to ask you, what's the weather like
it's
back?
not in Maryland. It's not too cold right now. The last few days have actually been a little bit warmer, so we're talking still in the highs in the 30s, maybe low 40s.
5 today. But anyways, go on.
You're not bragging. Um, so Eric and I have worked together a little bit before. We'll get into that, but and Eric, you've also worked with Chris Seveny some. But before we get into all that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I'll start probably college forward, but got out of college, which is when real life starts. And, out of college, I was kind of a do-gooder and was a teacher in the inner cities in New York, and then did that and then jumped into the military like you. So we've kind of got that common bond of some Army love.
Army officer experience, right?
Yeah, which was great. And I mean, that's kind of where my journey started. Was I did my do-gooder period as a young man, and then it became apparent to me that I needed to go make money. And
I can relate to that.
so I changed the world, but now I got to go make money. So like a lot of people, is I kind of got into real estate. Or I guess I didn't kind of get into real estate. I got into commercial real estate brokerage, and joined a firm out here, a regional brokerage, where I sell and lease warehouses, and started to make some decent money after a while. But it's not the grand money that you all think. But and started to get into investments myself personally, knowing that I've got some nice. Making some nice money. It's a little bit lumpy. I got to even it out. And, my first kind of journey into notes was I had a couple friends that were flipping houses. And this is back in, 2012, 2013, 14 type era. And when it was really good to be a flipper and it wasn't on the TV shows. And I was the bank. I was writing notes to some friends. And all of those deals went well up until the last one, and became the last one.
Okay.
And that was my first foreclosure.
Why don't you talk real quickly how you got in, like a little bit more detail about how that all happened before your foreclosure? Were you just approached by some friends, or how did that get going?
No, there was a kind of a local real estate investment club that I had been to a few meetings, got to know a few of the people, and this was one of kind of the leaders or one of the guys in it that was a mover and shaker. And he was flipping single family homes here in Southern California. So he's flipping homes locally, and we were creating hard money loans. And at the time, the market was, it was like 2%, 2 points and 12%, and they were short loans. And they were just, first and seconds. And
so how do you do that? I mean, obviously, most of our audience deals more on the owner occupied, mostly first lien, but we have, some second lien note investors, but less in the hard money space. So just briefly, if you can kind of highlight how the mechanics go of do you go through an attorney, or how do you, how does that work?
Good question. You have to know that trust was pretty high, because I came to know this person, personally. But yeah, to answer your question, to create the notes for this, we actually used an attorney through the club. He was just kind of one of the, it kind of came in as a package, if you will, of. Gotcha. He was associated with this club. We used him to prepare, and really good attorney, by the way, to no fault of theirs. And we both, myself and what, my partner in the deal who was doing the actual flipping, is we both went to the attorney, said, would you prepare the note? Um, and that's kind of how we put it together. It's wasn't first class, but it got the deal done.
Right.
So we went through a local attorney that prepared that for us.
Gotcha. Okay. So you did a few hard money deals that went well.
We did 5, and 4 went well.
Okay.
And the fifth.
Let's talk about the fifth one.
Well, this is really good for our audience to, and I think maybe as we progress, one of the themes we'll talk about is, you can have trust in people that you're working with, but you always need to do your due diligence and
Absolutely.
keep your eye on the ball. When you've done a couple deals with somebody, you tend to become somewhat complacent, and we were bordering that territory where, it was to the point where he'd come to me and say, "Hey, Eric, I got the next deal. Here's the paperwork. Here's the book. Here's the values."
Mm-hmm.
And, we could almost do it, and I'd almost kind of give him a check.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get there, but ultimately how this panned out is I took a second position. The first was Wells Fargo, and he was using that second position to fund the flip. And he was managing multiple flips at that time, and just got ahead of himself, and just had too many loans. Wasn't able. He took on a really, really big project that I wasn't involved in. That he took on a multi-million-dollar flip. Did it go well? And it's a different market. Selling $300,000, $400,000 houses is totally different than selling multi-million-dollar houses. They don't sell in a matter of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally different market. And I think, unfortunately, he'd been really successful, got in over his head. However it may be,
mm-hmm.
I got the property back in the middle of the flip, and the house that was supposed to have 4 walls had 3 walls. And
wow.
And it had a pool, which was no longer a pool. It was more of a swamp. And even in Southern California, where the weather is generally pretty good, things can go, can beat up a property pretty bad. And
so you were in second position, and then you got the property back. How did that work?
Position, and I went through the foreclosure process. For whatever reason, he did not give me the keys or a deed in lieu of. He did make me foreclose. It wasn't contentious, but I did have to go through the process, which in California is not a quick process. I want to say it took us, with him not fighting us, and
uncontested, right?
Uncontested foreclosure.
Pre-COVID even.
Pre-COVID, yeah. This is like 2014,
right?
It took every bit of 6 months. We had to go through the courthouse steps, and when we got the house, it was in rough shape.
And how much real estate experience did you have at that point?
I had been a broker for probably commercial real estate broker myself at that point for 2 to 3 years. So I was just dangerous enough.
Right.
But it was apples and oranges, because this is a single family house and I'm selling warehouses.
Yeah, sure.
Although it probably resembled more of a warehouse at this point.
Gotcha. So then what'd you do with the property?
We fire saled it. I mean, we sold it for, I won't say pennies on the dollar, but we didn't sell it for, there was a small loss on it.
Gotcha.
And it was a learning lesson, but I sold it. I turned around, I sold it to another investor who was a flipper. He was also a realtor, who was able to, rehab it, put it on the market, sell it. And truthfully, I could have done the work. I knew the people, I had access to a community where I could get the rehabbers to do the work, but I hadn't done it before. And I think, it's funny when I hear Chris talk about some of his notes is, some of them you can do the work and you can probably get out and be made whole,
right?
Or you can update and sell it a lot.
Now our Nightmare on Elm Street, the 337 Elm Street in Cecil County, Maryland, we did a whole episode on that one, but similar in some senses. We could have managed the rehab. I mean, I live an hour and 15 minutes from the property, and we probably, I think there was some meat on the bone still to make some money, but it just didn't make sense. And it's not what we do. So I've done rehabs myself, managed them before, but this would have been slightly outside of our comfort zone, and just, we probably would have come in around the same dollar figure, as far as profit or loss, but it would have taken so much work, so much time, and it's just better to get that money working, again for you.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Is I could have done it. I could have been made whole, but I would have had to put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And it
Right.
was my ego, is because I didn't want to take the loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
I looked at it and said, hey, if I just do on my day job as a commercial broker, I sell one building,
Yeah.
I do one big lease, and
Right.
I can do that in a quicker amount of time than I can do to this.
Right.
Take the loss, and
No, I think that's a really good. It's all about your perspective and keeping it in the big picture in mind. So, would you say, looking at that portfolio as a whole, those five, and it wasn't a portfolio per se, but those five that you did, you still made money, it sounds like.
yeah, I still made money. The loss at the end kind of, obviously hurt, but if you looked at it on the aggregate,
Yeah.
I probably made money. It wasn't
Mhm.
great, but I definitely made money. It was a
Yeah.
great experience and notes, and confirmed that I did not want to be a flipper.
No, that's a key piece of that's a key lesson to take from that. So then how did you pivot from there?
Um, really, I kind of just went back to my day job. Is I kind of put that behind me, just kept making money.
Yeah.
Um, with the eye of trying to get into the commercial real estate investment market. Was, I was brokering deals, doing good, understanding the process, knew the players. But at the end of the day, here in the Orange County, or the Southern California market, is, it's capital intensive.
Hmm.
And I just wasn't ready to make that leap. And we've just been in such a bull market here locally for warehouses, that you really have to know what you're doing. You have to be well capitalized, and just
Hmm.
wasn't able to make that jump. So, I was kind of in this, okay, I've got a decent amount of money. How do I start making it
Making
cash?
money. Yeah.
Have the money make money.
Right.
And by virtue is just listening to a podcast, I kind of stumbled on notes, and I said, I know real estate
Hmm.
at its core. I know notes. I know
Yeah.
foreclosures
Yeah.
now.
Right. Right.
And it kind of, I wasn't scared of it at that point. And,
Yeah.
started investigating it, listened to a few podcasts amongst people, called a few people, you know, uh, and kind of just, I just started picking up the phone and calling people. And that's, as a commercial real estate broker, and
You do
just
that.
my
You do that
personal,
all day long anyway, right?
yeah, it doesn't bother me to talk to people on the phone or in person. And I just started calling note investors, educators,
Hmm.
uh, and it determined that there was a decent amount of note education out there that I could subscribe to.
Hmm.
Um, and I decided not to. There is, a well-known educator, and I just decided he's got a program, and it was a significant amount of money. I said, no, I think I can learn it otherwise. And
Hmm.
um, which is kind of how I got into partials, because, I have a lot more partials than I do have notes myself.
Hmm.
Um, and it's actually turned out to be probably a little bit more fitting for the goals that I have.
Hmm.
But I was able to learn notes through people like Chris, listening to his podcast
Yeah.
and talking, and getting into Facebook communities, getting actually into the notes and bolts community. But again, I'm not an expert, and I'd really be more an expert in how to buy partials. That are really the experts.
Well, what led you to, I mean, you touched on it, but what led you to partials versus going ahead and buying your own whole note?
Good question. Well, I determined that notes were a route that I really wanted to go.
Hmm. Right. Why is that? Any particular reasons?
Good question. Is one, going back to it, is the note for me is the perfect size chunk. It's the right size deal. I can get a note anywhere, from a couple $1,000s, up in the hundreds of $1,000s. But I could get into a note, unlike a piece of real estate, pretty quickly. They were nice bite size. They were commission size chunks. I commission from my day job and go buy a note.
Buy a note, gotcha.
Cash flow. So that was very attractive to me that I could do that.
And it sounds like also the fact that I know people invest from a distance now in as buy and hold turnkey properties and that kind of thing. But it sounds like just the fact that you could invest in other geographic areas in notes where it actually makes sense, dollar wise or investment capital wise. Sounds like that was a key factor as well. I mean, that's something I love about notes is like I've literally been to the same Elm Street property. It's the only property I've been to. And we currently have 36 notes, 35, one under contract, so, and that's not a lot compared to a lot of people, but I've never been to almost all of those properties. So you can do it from anywhere. You really can with a cell phone and an internet connection. But then, so you were looking at notes and you decided, at least at that point, that you wouldn't go ahead and be a full note buyer, I guess, right?
Yeah. Let me just kind of go back and say, there was that component it was a nice bite-sized chunk. It was creating cash flow. And
right.
I saw the value of the velocity of money. And I thought that I could create a very high velocity in buying notes. For my own, if you will, my own personal economy, it was very valuable. I wanted a lot of cash flow. I've got nice chunks of money from my day job. I need cash flow, make sure I pay the bills. But more importantly is the more I can get money in, get it out, get it coming back as an investment. Yeah. This velocity of money was one of the keys that I wanted to focus on and became my investment thesis. And I saw that's a great avenue because, on a monthly basis, I'm getting my principal back and I'm getting interest back.
Yeah.
And the more times I get that going, and I kind of just, I just did a rough spreadsheet on Excel and I said, okay, if I make this amount of money, I put it in notes, I get this return and I keep reinvesting it.
Yeah.
The beauty of compound interest.
Yeah.
Just after, I mean, it's not overnight, but, over years, decades, that compound interest and that velocity of money,
right.
Compound interest was just something that I couldn't ignore. So,
yeah, and that consistent cash flow, like you've already hit on a couple times. Growing up, my father still is technically a real estate agent. He actually sold the Elm Street property. That's the third reference to that one. But I can remember times where, we had, I'm the oldest of 7 kids, but so we had periods where he was making real good money and then periods where he wasn't, and so it really ebbed and flowed. And I think had we maybe pursued more of a consistent cash flow, return from some of that money, that may have kind of helped even things out a little bit. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it felt like a fit for a lot of reasons. So, I was anxious to get into the community, get involved, and and started buying partials. And I found a couple people, talked to them, vetted them out, and all my partners, and I have on the partial side, you and Chris included, I have 4 total partners, and just started buying notes and partials through that. All of them have been some kind of hybrid of the partial idea. One is more like a joint venture, but they've all been on the performing side.
Gotcha.
And so I'm not a non-performing guy because, again, that goes back to my thesis of trying to get, compound interest, trying to get money in the door on a monthly basis rather than wait.
Yeah. And when I have calls with, different newer note investors, I guess. And we also did a blog post on we've done a couple that hit on these topics we're covering, but I personally think non-performing notes work better for joint ventures, or joint ventures work better with a non-performing note, I should say, and partials certainly work better on performing notes. I mean, you want that consistency. So that's one of the upsides is consistent cash flow. One of the downsides would be there's not a lot of upside potential. There's really none.
Yeah.
So, but you've got that with your day job, right?
Right. And you hit the nail on the head as, it's not all sunshine and rainbow and puppy dog tails. With it is you're creating cash flow, and, the interest amount on a partial or even a note is very good on a performing compared to other investment opportunities that you could make in the stock market or et cetera. If you're approaching double digit interest, that's pretty darn good.
Pretty good. And it's collateralized too. Stocks are, there's no collateral with a stock, right?
Exactly. And, and stocks are, I mean, that's tough. It's a lot of anxiety. And so I very early crossed that off and said, that's too much anxiety. Seeing up and down arrows, red and green, and being up one day. I remember I was doing the dishes, and I had just had an amazing day in the stock market, and I felt so great. And
genius.
I thought I'd made so much money, and the next day I was doing dishes, and all that money was gone. And in fact, I was down triple that. So, I pretty quickly marked that off.
Sure.
And with the passive cash flow. But back to your point is, notes are great, but you are not going to get some of the other added benefits of investments like hard real estate. Is you're not going to get the appreciation pop. You're not going to get the deductions.
Right.
It's a little bit harder to leverage.
Yeah, for sure.
Those in a way are kind of you all. The partial manager is a way of leveraging the power.
Yeah, another blog post we have is partials versus hypothecation, and hypothecation is the true version of leveraging, I guess, leveraging a note, but it's essentially accomplishing the same thing as a note, as a partial seller, right? I'm taking your investment, your cash, and I'm going out and either wasting all that money, or ideally I'm going and buying another note, and I'm using my current portfolio of notes as kind of, in a sense, collateral for that leverage. So it can be done. It's just much more difficult than hard real estate, like you said. So go ahead.
Well, and that's it. I mean, but the consistent cash flow, but what I'm not getting in real estate, if you were to buy investment property, whatever it may be, apartments, single family turnkey, commercial real estate investment, is I'm getting very consistent cash flow on it. And I'm getting my principal back on it too, which, going back to kind of the velocity of money is actually nice.
Yeah.
To get that principal back, where that money in real estate is tied up. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You've leveraged against it, but it's really just your avenue. And, for me, is partials have been a great investment thus far.
No, that's a really good point as far as principal coming back, because most of the time in a joint venture or a note fund, it's typically structured where you're not getting most, or certainly not all of that principal back, whereas you are getting a good portion of that back monthly. So where are you today with your kind of note investing, strategy? Have you determined you never want to be an active note investor per se, or how are you looking at things?
That's a really good question. I think I'm probably going to be, I don't know how you're going to tell this podcast, but something on partials or hypothecation, and that's likely, what I will be is just a partial buyer. And there's a couple reasons for that. Notes are very intriguing. I've had some experience. I know that, I know the players, I know the servicers, I know the mechanics, I've educated myself enough to be dangerous. And I do several notes myself personally. Is I ran up to the edge of the precipice of becoming a note investor and saw, you know, I can make X amount of dollars or X return doing it myself, putting in a lot of time and effort.
Hmm.
Or I could find a qualified,
Hmm.
a qualified partner who
Right.
really knows what they're doing, an expert, take a little less on the return side,
Right.
get some of that time back.
Right.
And that's what has put me in the box of partial is finding a you, finding a Chris.
Hmm.
It, I can do the note, I can do non-performing, not really my cup of tea, but I can do performing pretty good.
Yeah.
But when it's non-performing or,
Right.
that I hit the hiccup, there is time that you have to invest in
It's
it.
a
And
lot of work. Yeah.
yeah, I would rather you deal with it.
Yeah.
Than, so yeah, I'm for me, it's being a partial buyer has been pretty good. Uh,
Yeah. And I think a couple things, you made me think of a couple things here. One is, you hear a lot of more experienced investors across different asset classes talk about the importance of return of capital, not just return on investment, right? So return of investment, right? Not just ROI. Everybody likes to, you know, throw their money at these like 20+% ROI deals, IRR, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's protecting your bottom line is critical. So getting that principal back is key. But also another thing with partials and the way you have approached it, not just partials, but um, you've spread out your risk. So if you've done, if you had originally done that foreclosure hard money deal and that was the only one you did, maybe you wouldn't be doing any version of note investing at this point. And so you do hear that from some note investors. They'll say, well, I bought a pool of 5 notes and one of them was terrible, but because I had the other 4, I'm still a note investor. So it kind of circling back around to partials, you are able to structure the buy-in, the price. There's some flexibility there, so you can spread that risk. Say you've got $50,000 to invest, you don't have to buy one performing note and then it goes south, and then where are you? You can spread that risk around to 5 or 10 partials potentially. So did you say you do have some whole notes yourself, or no? Did I?
I do. I have a second and I have 3 firsts that I have. All of
Okay.
them are performing now at the
Okay.
moment.
That's
Um,
good.
yeah, they haven't always been. So, and that's, I bought a couple partials and I said, I was ready to make the next step to really get into notes. And I bought a couple and there's nothing wrong with them, but
Mhm.
you got to take a look at the amount of time
Sure.
involved. It's where, you know,
That's interesting because how do you just quickly, how do you manage those as far as software? Is it just Excel? I mean, I think personally, I tell people 5 to 10 notes is when you should start to consider, using a system like Podio or some kind of workflow system just to manage everything. I would say maybe you're not quite at that point, especially the partials being so passive, but how do you kind of manage your portfolio of notes?
good question. Just Excel spreadsheets.
Gotcha.
I think that's what I saw is, really take the next step is you need the systems and processes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like all things in life and all investments. And, it is a commitment to create the systems and the processes to
Yeah.
get involved. And the commitment wasn't there for me.
Yeah. No, I
Around,
hear. I mean, that's what, Chris and I like to, I think, point out the good, the bad, and the ugly. And note investing is not quite as passive as many people would lead you to believe. So I think you're taking a very realistic approach, and some of that is just from your personal experience as well. Um, so you're not thinking you're not looking to buy any more whole notes at this point. Sounds like.
probably not for the time being.
Sure.
As I've had a good experience with, like I said, with you and Chris, and
Yeah.
for a little bit of, just for the amount of time it for me and being air quote high income earner, focusing on my job and making the income and then letting you all do the work. And just
Yeah.
know that I'm getting above average returns. I'm getting consistent returns.
Yeah.
Is the win for me.
Sure.
And I definitely, I could get into the note space. I'm sure I could be successful, but I'd have to build the systems and the processes,
Yeah.
vetting it out. I know if there's one guy who knows systems and processes, it's definitely Chris.
Oh yeah. He just did a webinar on it, and I think a lot of people's jaws were hitting the desk.
Yeah, and yourself as well. So, and for the other people that I have partials with, all of them, with the exception of one, have really good systems and processes, and I've been the beneficiary of that. And
Yeah.
that's good. I don't want to set it up. I'd rather you set it up.
Right. Okay. So briefly, before we get into a little bit of the commercial space, briefly touch on infinite banking, if you would. I know you've kind of started down that road, but if you don't mind, just kind of, a lot of our audience either maybe has heard of IBC and the infinite banking concept, and but really not sure what that means, or they've decided it's not for them or whatever. It is something that I personally practice, but where are you in that part of your journey?
Great question. And I've been kind of on the sidelines. I've been a pretty active partial buyer of Chris and yours, and I've kind of taken a quick kind of couple months to get the infinite banking set up. But the reason being, if you go back to my investment thesis on compound interest and the velocity of money, is getting it in, getting it out, making it turn for you, creating your own personal economy. In speaking with you is kind of a concept that I had heard about, but as I explored it, was really the next step in continuing the acceleration of my personal economy, of taking money in, putting it in a high cash value dividend paying life insurance policy, which is essentially what infinite banking is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Being able to take that money out in a loan that's a lot easier to take than, say, taking a real estate loan or something along those lines, a HELOC, some sort of loan from a bank, is taking it from myself, having that money remain in my personal economy, continuing to grow compound interest. I mean, you've heard it is compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Mm-hmm. That's been my investment thesis. Mm-hmm. And that's it exactly. If my money can continue to stay in my life insurance policy and earn 3 to 5%, even while I have it taken out, earning, another 8 to 12% or more, depending on where they are as a note investor.
Right.
That's a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And
wins in there. I only meant 3. Yeah. And so I mean, I'm still pretty new into it.
Yeah.
But
no, my personal take is that it doesn't need to be as controversial as it seems to be out there. And, I think there are a lot of maybe not so ethical insurance agents, and maybe that is part of the issue. And then you frankly have Dave Ramsey spouting off incorrect information about it. So the Wealth Without Wall Street guys just did a podcast on a Dave Ramsey video on this topic. We don't need to go too far down that path, but
we can, and I think there's a point to be made, and that's really who you work with.
Yeah.
And not to make your head and Chris's head too big, but I enjoy working with you all because you're qualified in your domain. You're experts in that. If you work with that on the life insurance side of things, mm-hmm. you can get an extraordinary results as well. And right. here's the story: is in exploring infinite banking. I've got a really good golf buddy out here that I play with who's an insurance broker, and I discussed the concept over a round of golf with him, and he mm-hmm. said, "Oh yeah, I use it. I'm a proponent of it." Mm-hmm. And I was kind of getting down the line, but even as a friend of mine who this is his business pointed me down the wrong path, and I didn't go into the concept too much, but he was having me use stock life insurance companies rather than mutual life insurance companies
Right,
that are
right,
motivated
right.
rather than the member.
Well, yeah, that was actually one of the things Dave Ramsey incorrectly said recently, was that one of the big insurance companies out there you know, is a mutual company, and if you just Google it, and they haven't been a mutual company for 20 years. So that is a key point. So I think the key, couple key takeaways, like you said, it's really critical who you're working with, right? I mean, not just on the notes side, but also on the insurance side and just in general. And then most life insurance policies are not well structured for this. So they have to be intentionally structured to use for infinite banking or some version of infinite banking. So this is not a podcast on infinite banking, but I just wanted to touch on that. And so how do you foresee using that in the future?
Well, I'll just finish off that point. It is a podcast on making sure that you're using the right people that you're vetting that are providing you what you're looking for.
Right.
And even your friends might not be the best person for you. And sometimes, and not for this particular individual, but I see it in real estate, in commercial real estate, is using friends. Sometimes somebody will have a building to sell and they'll say, well, you're my friend, you're a commercial real estate agent, sell my building for me. Well, when you have an industrial warehouse broker selling your office building or selling your retail property, they're not the most qualified person, or even worse, when you have a residential broker trying to sell your commercial real estate for you, they're not the most qualified person, and you can get burned that way. And just like my friend, an insurance broker, I just couldn't get him to give me the product that I wanted. He couldn't get off the shackle of his job to get me what I wanted,
right?
What I was trying to create. And so, I had to find a different service provider that could do that. So, I'm sorry, you asked.
So where do you plan to? How do you plan to use it in the future?
Great. To take policy loans against to use that money. That's my capital source now.
Yeah, gotcha.
And by partials. And the beauty of it, although I haven't done it, but just looking at it from conceptually, is, I take money that's in my cash value, that's my money to take out, and I borrow against it, and borrowing 4 to 5%.
Right.
It's growing at that same amount of money.
Right.
So continuing to grow. My cash value is continuing to grow inside that vault.
Right.
I can take that money and invest it in a partial or real estate.
And then you're arbitraging that same money. You're making the difference. And oh, by the way, there's still a death benefit.
And oh, by the way, still the whole death benefit side of it, which is to sell to my spouse.
Right.
Gotcha. And that's the thing, is you always got to figure out how to sell to your spouse or your
Absolutely. That is true.
I was telling her, I can take this policy loan and this and that, and it didn't make any sense to her, and she, as some sort of witchcraft. But when I told her, and and the death benefit if I die,
you get a lot of money. Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah. So
I'd be careful at night. So okay, now let's pivot over briefly to your day job, and if you don't mind speaking about where do you see things going with after the whole pandemic is kind of behind us? What are the different asset classes? How have they been affected by the pandemic? And office, retail, the whole commercial space in general, where do you see things going?
It's a great question, and it's been really unique. Getting into commercial real estate in 2012, 2013 was, I got to see things coming out of the depths of the recession. And I've seen it continue, now being almost 9-10 years into commercial real estate. When I was getting into it, and by and large, I should tell you, I'm an industrial broker, which is code for warehouses, manufacturing buildings, land. But I do some office and retail deals. But what I farm and what I work on, and the clients that I try to work with, are all industrial and warehouse. And we've seen technology has had a really really interesting effect on commercial real estate. Is the Amazons and the eBays of the world have really made warehouses more valuable. People need to warehouse their inventory. And really, I mean, from 2012 to, if we took it up to COVID, that's kind of been the demographic change, is how people shop, how they, how the economy is functioning, and has increased the importance and the value on industrial warehouse real estate. So I've seen some really significant appreciation on both the sales side and on the lease rate. But I also, I'm exposed and do deals on the office and retail, and just have not seen those same increases that we've seen on the warehouses. I mean, I remember when I first got in the business in 2013, I was just out there cold calling, knocking on doors, and I had a guy tell me, the value of real estate will never be, or of warehouse will never be more than $100 a square foot, which is kind of the metric that we use. Mm-hmm. We use square foot prices, mm-hmm. both on the lease and the sales side. Okay. And I knocked on his door in 2020, pre-pandemic, mm-hmm. and the sale price was well over 300. So,
wow,
it's kind of, and so I mean, it's just been, to see in that period of time, some prices almost triple. But that takes us up into COVID. And let me back up to this. I've seen the value of warehouse continue to increase. I saw where office kind of struggle through recent. Mm-hmm. We went through a couple iterations of creative office became very popular. Co-working became very popular, but it was all trying to keep the office product alive. And retail, conversely, has been struggling as well. There have been a lot of successful retail projects, but they're experiential, meaning it's for consumers go to this retail real estate for an experience, whether it's a shopping experience of restaurants and ambiance and atmosphere, or maybe it's something, sports oriented. So the experiential retail market has been doing okay. But the traditional real estate or retail market of, the neighborhood shopping centers where you're just going to go buy a pair of shoes, or some consumer good, has really been suffering because people have been doing it online.
Sure.
So, and that kind of led us up into the pandemic and COVID. And like most of the world was when it hit, the world stopped and took a breath for a moment and tried to out what we were going to do.
Yeah.
And what it did was just exacerbate what was already happening.
Okay.
And industrial warehouse real estate just became white hot. Where it was white hot previously, it was really white hot now. And for me locally in the markets I work, it's, the lowest vacancy rate that we've ever had. And, now we have even crazier low interest rates, and we have a whole money. I mean,
there's the cost of capital is quite low, and there's a lot of money still kind of sitting there, right?
Yeah.
So business has essentially been.
This is good for industrial brokers here. I would say that 95% of my clients are actually doing better, and they have been doing better for quite some time. In the pandemic, it was almost like, okay, we took March to figure out what's going on. April, we thought we were dying. May, life was kind of returning, I won't say to normal, but from a business perspective, it was. And then from then on, it's just the bite's been on, and across the board, my clients have been doing really, really well that are industrial based, manufacturers, contractors, warehousing, e-commerce.
Gotcha. Well, that's good to hear. I mean, it's one of those balancing acts. You don't want to minimize the pain and suffering that has been very real for a lot of people this past year. And Chris and I talk about this, and that's not at all what you or I were doing. But the truth is, people have had very good years as well in 2020. So and not only that, typically behind every problem is an opportunity, and you got to be able to. If you do have, you've got your systems in place, I'm sure you're probably going to tweak things a little bit and pivot somewhat, but you've got to don't just bury your head in the sand. You got to go out there and still make things work. So are you looking forward to changing things in any way, or are you kind of just full steam ahead as far as comparing maybe 2019 to 2021?
I mean, it's full steam ahead, and even if it was, the market wasn't the way it was or is, it would still be full steam ahead.
Mm-hmm.
As to whether we're shifting things, I mean, um, no, the
Mm-hmm.
pedal to the floor on all accounts is,
Mm-hmm.
I continue to stay focused on industrial warehouse real estate. It's just, I kind of won the lottery of that was what I worked on. The
Mm-hmm.
asset class that has
Mm-hmm.
been beneficiary of all of this is what I generally work in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's continuing to work on that. I mean, I guess the takeaway is, within that vertical, which industries do I want to, work with? And,
Yeah.
winners in this market right now are e-commerce businesses.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, but that's not to say that contractors are also doing well. Manufacturing is, it depends on what industry. For the example of aerospace manufacturing right now is not doing great, understandably so. But really focusing on businesses that are focused on e-commerce, and
Mm-hmm.
um, there's some really young guys out there that are doing some really awesome stuff
Mm-hmm.
and really big money.
Yeah, that's cool. So, anything else as we wrap up here, Eric, that you want to touch on, whether it be related to your background, or your hard money lending, or notes, or partials, or infinite banking, or commercial real estate? We've hit a lot of
Yeah,
valuable
I don't know
topics.
if there's a theme in this that you can extract, but maybe one of them would be, uh, know who you're working with and vet them. And even if the trust is high with them, make sure your paperwork is, correct. I think that's just, the value of working with the right people, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, would be a big takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from this, and I've learned that myself. That's an episode for another day, but uh, not every deal is going to go well, even if you fully vet the person you're working with. But I think one of the keys is communication, through the process. And if you're working with someone that has, a track record, and is ethical, they're going to communicate with you and tell you, look, we thought things were going to go really well, or we planned for X, Y, and Z, but we didn't plan for COVID. So it's like things can go wrong at the deal level. But if you're working with someone that you know and trust, and that is an expert, like you said, not just a friend of yours, no offense to your buddy, golfing buddy, but that can go a really long way. And I think another takeaway too is from your story is, don't just put all your eggs in one basket, right? So, you did 5 hard money deals. You have a few whole notes of your own. You have 4 different partial sellers, I think you mentioned. And so you're still here to talk about it. You're in the commercial space, but your investment in notes is mostly in that strategy is mostly in the residential space. So you're not putting all your eggs in one asset class or anything like that. So I think that's another key takeaway as well. Anything else you want to add, Eric?
No, I think that was a beautiful summary of it. I'm really appreciative that a lowly little guy like me could get some airtime.
I think it's too bad Chris was afraid to, come on with you. You were too intimidating. He gets a little, yeah, he gets scared like that. No, Chris was tied up at his real job.
Yeah.
Kind of gets in the way sometimes, but so for all the listeners out there, I would say check out our Facebook group if you haven't already. It's the Notes and Bolts from the Good Deeds Note Investing Podcast group. There's a lot of free knowledge floating around, a lot of really helpful people. It's one really good way to get connected with partial sellers and other note investors. And don't forget to give us reviews on all the outlets and go out and do some good deeds. Thanks, everyone.